we can let the record show that everyone that was here for Committee of the Whole is also here for the Water Utility Commission meeting. First up, we have approval of the minutes from May 14th.
Move approval.
Motion and a second. Is there any comments or discussion on those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And the minutes are approved. Next up, we have a couple of discussion items and possible action. First is authorization to purchase 350 water meters and associated appurtenances. I love it when Will uses those words. In a not to exceed amount of $120,000. I think Jim will give us a quick overview. Some of us don't know about the water meter replacement program, so maybe a little introduction to that, and then we'll take up this matter.
Sure. Good. Stays on. The Public Service Commission requires all water utilities to either test or replace water meters on a standard schedule. The water meters that are typically installed in residential homes are 1 inch and smaller, so 1 inch 3/4, like 5/8. And those are the utility replaces on a 20-year schedule. So when we first got started, for the first 20 years, we didn't have to replace any meters. But starting back in 2019 or 2018, we got to the age where the meters were 20 years old. So we started a replacement program. And we did a study to look at how many we should replace on an annual basis. And the chart is in there for everyone to take a peek at. So the goal is to get those meters replaced, as they age. Normally, we do this request for the meter purchase or this authorization for the meter purchase as part of budget. But there were two issues that kind of pushed this forward. One was, it's a good issue. We actually have a lot of development going on right now. There's the development of the Grove in River Hills. There's also the townhomes for Foxtown, which are building rapidly. And then there's more townhomes in Thiensville, and now with the development of Swan Ridge, there's just anticipation of a lot of homes completing and then needing meters for installation in those homes. And that's new installation, not replacements. And that's the inventory side of this order. The other issue is the time that it takes to receive these. Ever since about 4 years ago, it's hard to get computer chips, and those computer chips are what are in the radios. And that pushes the date out on those radios to 6 months plus. Last year we ordered all of our meters from this program in November, right after budget was complete, and we just received all of the products so we could start swapping out meters last month. So that gives you an idea of our timeline. So the thought process was, with all of this inventory, all of these new construction, and trying to get meters early enough so that we can start swapping in like spring instead of fall, the thought is to get approval now, and then obviously the money would be a part of the budget, but we could at least put in a verbal order with the manufacturers to get the ball rolling so that we get in the queue. Because I checked with the radio manufacturer, and they told me that if we had ordered them 2 weeks ago, they would have come the week between Christmas and New Year's. So we won't receive these until after the first of the year if we were to order them tomorrow. So that's just a quick history.
I'll turn my mic back on. Thank you. Any questions from the commission? Or a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? And those items are approved. Next up, we have a policy discussion related to the amortization of depreciation costs for private water trusts. And is Kristen going to walk us through the discussion?
I am.
Okay, thank you.
As noted in the memo, we've recently had some inquiries from private water trusts about connection requirements. Luckily, this commission did a large amount of work a little over 2 years ago to create a water connection policy that otherwise outlines for the majority of connections, including those private water trusts, in terms of those terms of connection. For those that were involved in that process, you may recall that that includes the consideration of depreciated costs for existing private water trusts. Normally, when we accept new development through the build and contribute process, the materials that were otherwise used are brand new. So when the infrastructure is dedicated to the utility, there isn't an immediate impact to the utility ratepayers for the future replacement of them, and the revenue from those customers is what contributes towards its eventual future replacement. In the case of private water trusts, those systems have already depreciated and therefore will require replacement sooner than a brand new system would. And in recognition of that, the water connection policy requires a depreciation payment to the water utility that essentially is that down payment for the future replacement cost to offset any cost to existing ratepayers for the acceptance of that system. As some of those private water trusts are completing the analysis as to whether it's in the best interest for their customers to privately fund or fund through the private water trust the infrastructure improvements required, or whether it would be better to consider the connection to the Mequon water utility, one of the largest issues they're facing is they haven't already amassed sufficient capital funds to do either pay for the infrastructure upgrades that are otherwise required to maintain the private system, or to pay the Mequon water utility the depreciation costs. On the private side, they're also finding difficulty getting lending. It's kind of an unusual situation with a private water trust for them to get lending for the money they would need it, and therefore their only option is to charge the residents rather substantial capital costs for the infrastructure. Therefore, they reached out to the Mequon water utility to question whether or not we would consider amortizing the depreciation costs. So in other words, rather than collecting the full amount up front, if we would collect it over time. As noted, again, there's not an immediate cost to the Mequon water utility for connection. Those connection costs, at least for policy discussion purposes, would still be borne 100% by those private water trusts. This would really just allow for a payment over time of that depreciation cost. It would also allow the Mequon water utility to receive revenue from those customers sooner than presumably would be allowed if they had to seek other means or take years to save the money themselves before they depreciated it. So we're otherwise looking just for policy direction at this point, whether the commission would be willing to consider language. I did provide, simply as a reference, some of the special assessment language that was utilized for the most recent sanitary sewer project, just as an example, so that if policy was favorably received, that you could see some of the terms and provide staff with guidance. And if received positively, we would come back at a future meeting with an amendment to the water connection policy for consideration of adoption.
Define what a private water trust is. Who do they serve? How many are there? Because I wasn't here 2 years ago, so I need a little background on what they are.
Sure. Prior to the city of Mequon owning and operating a Mequon water utility, many subdivisions had their own private water trusts. So typically set up where they have a well and infrastructure to otherwise distribute the water to their customers. They charge them for both the water and operation and maintenance, but most didn't ultimately plan for capital costs, whether that's service lateral replacement or water main breaks, or what they're seeing now is more issues with their well, be that failure of the pump or some of the requirements for backup power and other things. And so the number Jim would have to speak to and probably divide between Mequon and Thiensville, because there are private water trusts in both.
Yep. I live in a private water trust, so Beechwood Farms has roughly 103 people, all served by a common well.
that
It's
are
got all the distribution hardware in the ground. There's fire hydrants, the whole 9 yards, although the fire department would be reluctant to hook up to them because the peak flow isn't probably what they need.
and Beechwood Farms is actually a
No, they have a certified guy come test the well every area. There's requirements from DNR for
Yes.
all of that. So
they are regulated just like the public water
where
utility is
each
for
of
them.
those is their own little water utility.
Yes.
But as Kristen points out, they seldom, and that is certainly true in Beechwood Farms, they seldom save enough money to fund ongoing maintenance. So one of the surprises I got when I bought my house there was that there was a special assessment that the owner didn't tell me about that I found out about on closing day. So surprise, you owe another $5,000 over time. So that was an attempt that $5,000 was for lateral replacement because the laterals were starting to fail. And they've replaced a few, but they've stopped replacing them. It's a whole phenomenon. And if you have a single home with your own well, you've never experienced it before. But there's a few of these around Mequon and Deansville, and more they're realizing they're not well equipped to operate their own water utility because it's run by an HOA with people that do it on an even more part-time basis than we do as elected officials. So yeah, interesting stuff.
Can I just, like, on Huntington Park, we have our own. And so for 30 years, our water bill was $60. Well, this last year was up to $135 a quarter because to collect money in case down the road we're going to need it, because it was pretty reasonable for $60 a quarter. So now it's, more than double what it was last year for future maintenance.
And to answer your question, Greg, when I first started with We Energies at the water utility in 2001, there were about 40 water trusts or OTMs, other than municipal. OTMs is the way that DNR refers to them. Now there's probably about 18 left. So they kind of slowly connected to the water utility as the water utility got close.
Some of those have already connected.
Oh yeah, I would say the majority of them have, but there's still like about 18 of them that are left.
Thank you.
Yep.
Alderman Parish.
Do you want to go first? Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Welcome
Saw you
back,
first, so you got called
Commissioner
first.
Voigt. To answer the questions at hand, yes, I absolutely support the recommendation for depreciating new or older wells coming onto our system, provided that that's secured by the tax bill.
Mm-hmm.
And assuming it is, I view it as a very safe policy, so to speak. It also assumes that the depreciation costs can be accurately calculated. I have no idea how you would do that. I assume you have some engineers that will come in and give the water utility an accurate basis for that.
That part's already defined. The determination of the depreciation cost is already included in the
Yeah.
water connection
But
policy.
who goes in the ground and sees what the condition of the pipes are and what system we're really taking on to know that
Correct.
it's
There's
Yeah,
there's a condition
The
assessment study that's
condition
required.
assessment
Mhm.
done.
Okay.
When we created that policy not that long ago.
okay.
So yeah, you assess what's there, and you have all the engineering drawings from how it was
Right.
built, and then you go and assess the health of the system, and it all goes into a big spreadsheet, and a number pops out at the end.
If my colleagues would humor me just for 2 more minutes, if this was an interesting conversation, and I thought the write-up was good because you have a couple of interesting topics buried in there. First of all, I really like this new policy because it could obviously encourage more of these private water trusts to come on board, and with a return on investment of over 10% per hookup, so to speak, it makes somewhat good financial sense from the return on investment perspective. I really appreciated your point about how bringing on these older homes that were before the water agreement would actually benefit the 80-20 water agreement rule because it would water down the base, so to speak.
Mhm.
So by getting as many of these older homes on that were pre-existing before 70 or 80, I don't, whoa,
98.
I'm off. Okay. So before that date, if we can get as many of those on the system, I really think it's to the benefit of the overall system. It will help with our negotiations with our city attorney is, I believe, working on a contract amendment, which is on his task list, and so we're working on that. I do believe that doing more connections all at once is way more efficient than kind of plucking off one group at a time. And so if we are going to go down this path, we did talk about this during the strategic planning, is do we want to market our services to, on main, not using? Do we want to be more proactive and market those services to on main, not using, because there's such a high return and low cost to hook them up? So that seems to be, are these water trusts on main?
Some are, some are not.
Okay.
It depends on the trust.
Okay. And certainly as you're digging pipe and tearing up roads, it would probably make sense to do a bunch of these private water trusts near each other so you can get efficiencies with road tear-ups and pipes and so on. So I guess I'm envisioning some kind of program moving forward where if we are going to do this, let's get as many doing it. And the final benefit I see is it gets more people off wells, which improves the well capacity for the people on wells, which is so important to all of us on council. So there's a lot of benefits to this, and I appreciate staff's creative approach and letting us know about it.
And several of those that you mentioned, just to reiterate for those that may not have been here at the time, are included in the water master plan to ensure that there is proactive education for those on main not using customers of the opportunity to connect. Certainly if there are any of these private water trusts that connect, we can work through the agreement if there are other homes adjacent to the private water trust that would make sense to connect at the same time. And the mayor happens to live in a private water trust that is interconnected with up to 3 other private water trusts. So there can be scaling involved as well if one of them wanted to be able to talk to the adjacent ones as well. That's not the only one that there's some interconnect, but
The biggest impediment is getting multiple HOA boards to all agree all at the same time.
and we have talked about kind of the idea of a town hall meeting, so to speak, to be able to educate people on these opportunities and both the policies we already have in place, and this happened to be a question of one of the I don't know her title, but of the managers of her water trust in looking for what she could offer to otherwise potentially appease the concerns of the residents in connection. And so it was actually her request that brought this forward so that it could be another offer to the residents to help with the cost to connect.
And I can tell you in the entire time that I've worked for the utility for both We Energies and for the city, that is always the question I always get asked. Is there any way that the utility can finance this? That's every single time I get that question. So just letting you know that.
Well, we wouldn't be financing it, but we would be spreading the capital outlay out over multiple years. So
Yes.
yeah, it takes maybe a $10,000 bill and makes it a $2,000 bill for 5 years. Spreads it out with interest.
A note to just reiterate, unlike special assessments where there is a cost that then we are literally assessing to the benefiting properties, the depreciation cost is not a direct cost. There is not an outlay of funds to the Mequon utility. It's the buy down of the future cost for the replacement of the system. So in this case, there's there's an amount of financial risk that obviously if something happened to the utility within that time frame, we wouldn't have collected the full depreciation cost up front. But outside of that risk, it's relatively low risk to the utility because we're just collecting the money over time instead of all up front.
And we're in a much stronger financial position than
Yes.
we were a decade ago.
Yes.
So there's more capital in the bank if something bad happens. And I mean, this might not have even been something we could consider talking about
I
10
think
years
Jim
ago.
and I would tell you it was not something we could have considered. So
Our appetite for any risk at all on
Yes.
any measure was about zero because it was very touch and go. But we're doing well now because we've added so many customers. So no policy decision tonight, just a
Correct.
directive to work on policy to bring back later. One more question from Alderman Pratt.
Not really a question, more a comment. Appreciate you bringing this forward. I have had residents in District 7 come forward and express, how hard of a mountain it is to get over that big upfront payment. So I think this would work well. with other water districts in the state, I've not heard of any issues with this sort of model, like deferred payments. So I'm not worried about it for our district. So yeah, I think public information is important. I think, as Brian said, like there's a lot of benefits. So maybe even an open house when we roll this out, just be great. Thank you.
So show of hands, who's in favor of seeing a policy come back to make this possible? Okay. There you go. Now you
Thank you.
know.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll look forward to taking up this topic. I'm not sure when, but I'm guessing
As soon as we can get it done.
sometime after budget.
Or maybe with budget, if
Okay,
we can
well,
get
okay.
it. But yeah.
The challenge has been thrown
With
down.
utility budget, I should say, not general
Okay,
levy
that
budget, but
does lag a
utility.
couple of weeks.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. We're at the end of our water utility meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned